Hello, a very good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock here in the United Kingdom. We are at COP26 in Glasgow again this morning. Yep, we are still here, as indeed are the delegates. Are they any closer to a deal? Good morning.
Good morning. Not quite yet. They are exhausted. They've bought their sleeping bags. A long day of negotiations ahead.
OK, more from Ashna to come. They're all trying to save this. It's Saturday, the 13th of November. Going into overtime, negotiations over a possible final agreement at the COP26 climate summit will continue today.
Power! Power! People! Power to the people!
Making their voices heard, demonstrators urge countries not to water down the agreement over curbing fossil fuels and providing climate funding.
I'm in one of Australia's coal mining regions where people say banning coal would be catastrophic.
Beijing's not quite in tune with the mood music at COP26. Far from cutting emissions, China's all for building more coal-fired power stations.
And here in Chennai in India, the floodwaters have receded, but there are still millions of people at risk from the impacts of climate change.
Also making the news this morning, a man dies and a pensioner is critically ill in hospital after they were stabbed in a street in West London. And finally free, a court in California terminates Britney Spears' conservatorship. The singer says it's the best day ever. In sport, England are just 1 point away from World Cup qualification after a Harry Kane hat-trick helps them thrash Albania. The weather mild and settled for most, but some light rain in places too. And at 7:45, we'll take a look at the papers with journalist Thomas Copeland and PA's political correspondent Jerry Scott.
Good morning from Glasgow, where we are into extra time as negotiators try to thrash out a climate deal. We're expecting some kind of updated draft agreement in the next few hours. The main sticking points include subsidies for coal and fossil fuels and financial help for poorer countries. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, reports.
For many, the time for quiet negotiation has passed. After 12 days of patient UN process, demonstrators staged a symbolic walkout at the lack of ambition from leaders at COP26.
Governments aren't listening to us, and we want to say that the outcomes here are not going to be just. We want to see action where all the demands are met and the fossil fuels are kept in the ground.
We've got to be going a lot further and a lot faster at this point.
There's a massive disconnect between what these activists are calling for and what's actually being reflected in the text being negotiated here in Glasgow. The elements of it are actually quite radical as far as the UN process goes. The question is, will those elements survive to the end? After pulling an all-nighter corralling groups of divergent negotiators, COP President Alok Sharma now has to rush nearly 200 ministers to agree positions before time runs out.
We need to all get back to work. Let us drive progress and forge consensus. And as so many of you have said, the eyes of the world are on us.
Key parts of the negotiating text about cutting coal and finding more finance for poor countries have been watered down, but their meaning survives. And so far, no country wants to be seen as an obstacle, and many may even compromise more.
We've actually proposed many of the solutions that have been put on the table that have allowed the negotiations to move forward. So I don't see how one could believe that we would be we could be an obstacle to anything. Quite to the contrary.
But differences, potentially intractable ones, remain. The summit's aim to keep 1.5 alive hinges on countries agreeing to return next year with more ambition to cut carbon. But that's still a red line for some who won't give up fossil fuels and for others who want more time.
I think that the arrangements should be based on the framework and provisions of the Paris Agreement to allow parties space and time in implementing their pledges.
One thing that could bring China and others round is more money for the developing world where it has many interests. The US has definitely thrown its diplomatic weight at COP, but not its wallet.
Special Envoy Kerry, what progress has been made? Where are the sticking points?
I think we're making progress. We're doing what negotiators should do. We're negotiating.
Worried about finance?
We will get there. No, not at all.
The talks will now extend well into today, testament to the difficulties that remain, but also that a deal is still on the table. Outside, some protesters tried to climb the miles of fencing surrounding COP26. Many negotiators inside must know how they feel, scaling the seemingly impossible, but with genuine hope it's not all in vain. Tom Clark, Sky News, Glasgow.
Nationals also still here. Chance of a deal today?
We hope so. I mean, the new renewed target, I suppose, to aim for is 4 p.m. today. It's what lots of officials are saying, sort of off the record. But you're right, we are expected to get this third draft of this agreement in the next few hours. Yesterday morning, it dropped at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's hoped that we'll get it around a similar time today. But it's all about the negotiators who have been spending the night here, Kay. This centre is open 24 hours and they've brought their sleeping bags with them. It has been extremely exhausting for them. They've been spending not only time talking to each other, but also sleeping as well. But it's all about keeping that target of 1.5 alive. And we've got a little graphic to outline what's being discussed in the agreement. So to get to 1.5 degrees, there is an argument that to achieve that, countries will need to phase out coal. And there will be a close focus on whether countries commit to phase out other fossil fuel subsidies. But crucially, it's all about the finance, isn't it? We've spoken about this a lot. Developing nations will also be watching to see if a pledge to provide that $100 billion a year to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change will be met. And we will see if states are willing to offer detailed plans to cut their carbon emissions. But it is all about the detail, really. It's reaching a point where, with things like the cutting of emissions and the targets, but also the fossil fuel subsidies. Saudi Arabia is one country that's wanting that part of the agreement to be removed. Nations in the EU, other nations as well, wanting that part of it to stay. It survived the second draft of the agreement. Will it stay? That's the big question, really. All eyes on the fossil fuels.
I was reading something last night that said we might hear something around about 8 o'clock this morning. On the breakfast show. Let's see for now. Ashna, thanks so much indeed. Thank you. Meantime, let's take you to Chennai in India, where floods are starting to recede, thankfully. But climate change is still a huge concern. Katerina Vitozzi is there for us. Hello to you, Katerina. Good morning. You've been wading around in smelly water all week. What's it looking like now?
Well, a relief for our crew and certainly a relief for the many millions of people in Chennai as these floodwaters have now receded after now about a day and a half of this, as you can see, pretty hot and dry weather. But as you say, climate change still something which does threaten many, many millions of people across this country. We're standing now on this beach next to the Bay of Bengal. It's a stretch of water. It's the top of the Indian Ocean and it borders India, Bangladesh and Myanmar. And as temperatures rise globally, we've witnessed how communities have been affected by the changes that planet warming has on the water that's warming in the shores, which obviously a country like India with a huge coastline is desperately impacted. And I think as we look over the agreements and the talks and the discussions and crucially the decisions that come out of COP26, there will be many people here who will know that what decisions happen in Glasgow will impact their futures here. It is a strange situation in some respects. There are many people here who simply don't know what climate change is. You ask a question about climate change and people sort of shrug and say, why should we be concerned about a global climate crisis when we are more concerned about our short-term families' survival? It's as stark as that for many of the millions of people in India that live in poverty. But we've also been speaking with young climate activists. I spoke to one 22-year-old just this morning and I asked her what she thought of the draft agreement so far, and she put put it extremely bluntly. She said it wasn't enough, it was too little, too late. And she quoted Greta Thunberg, someone who is very much held in high esteem by young climate activists here, who say we have to do the seemingly impossible and we have to do it now.
OK, thank you, Katerina. Let's take you to Beijing now, should we? China not quite on board with what's being discussed here in Glasgow, although there has been significant movement, hasn't there, Tom, during the week?
Yeah, I mean, expectations, Kay, for China a lot because it's the world's biggest polluter, and it was dialing down that all the way through, especially when it comes to coal. Its plan is to still keep adding coal power stations until 2025 and then only gradually reduce it. And of course, President Xi Jinping, he didn't even go to COP and he didn't make a statement. It was just a written statement uploaded to the website. So that was all fairly done. But then we had that really surprising breakthrough with the US and China coming together to put forward a joint statement on climate change. Showing just how important it is. I mean, these are two countries, the two biggest polluters, who disagree on almost everything around the world and in China, things like Xinjiang and the treatment of the Uyghur minority there. But they did say they would set aside those differences and work on climate change together. Now, what we didn't get from that was any new pledges. And I think that's been clear for some time that China is going to stick to what President Xi Jinping announced last year and work out how to achieve that. It doesn't feel like it has to bow to international pressure. But in that joint agreement with the US, it said that it would try as much as possible to accelerate its move away from coal. Again, it's vague. There are no specific targets there, but at least it is down there on paper, and it perhaps gives some impetus for China to move quicker than it has been so far.
OK, thank you, Tom. And coal mining is, of course, a contentious issue, even in somewhere that likes to boast its green credentials, like Australia. Siobhan Robbins standing by in Newcastle, Australia, for us, coal mining region in New South Wales, of course. Hello to you, Siobhan. Increasingly, the youth of Australia not at all happy with the what's going on as far as coal mining is concerned in that country, but it makes a lot of people a lot of money.
Yes, that's right. As you say, I'm in Newcastle. This is one of the biggest export coal ports in the world, and it's at the mouth of the Hunter Valley where there are numerous coal communities. And we've spent much of COP26 speaking to people in those communities who make their money from coal. And they're simply saying we're not moving away from it now. We expect our mines to be open for at least 30 years. It gives us good jobs, good prospects, investment in our community. Why on earth would we move away from it? But then at the same time, Australia's under a lot of pressure because they're being labelled by some as laggards by the fact that they haven't improved their 2030 emissions targets, they haven't signed up to this coal pledge, they haven't joined the methane pledge. And the government this week said they wouldn't be shutting coal-fired power stations, they wouldn't be closing coal mines. They're saying they're going to transition by investing in new technology. But when you speak to campaigners at the conference, which we have been doing throughout the week, they've been labelling Australia a colossal fossil. One of them told me this morning the only thing that Australia has brought to COP26 is good coffee.
OK, thanks very much indeed, Siobhan. Thank you. Let's stick with the theme of energy now, should we? And should we bring in the Chief Exec of Scottish Power? That's Lindsay McQuaid. Hi, Lindsay. We chatted to you at the start of COP. Here we are, just us and the mice at the end and a few delegates. How's it gone?
I'm taking away from it that there's a sense that everyone now understands what the issue is. There's an acceptance of the science. I'm hearing consistent messages, whether it's from activists, general public, financiers, NGOs and government officials that I've spoken to from all over the world, that there's a sense that there has to be a response, there has to be an action. And I think at COP26, what we're seeing is recognition of that. We might not get everything that we want, but there's certainly an understanding of the need for pace and acceleration between now and 2030 if we're going to hit those targets in the latter part of the century.
Wasn't that the case after Paris, though?
I think after Paris, there was a sense of creating that baseline. I think the series of COPs in between, you know, there's been some movement, some understanding. I think now, there's an even greater understanding of the science. The science is now irrefutable. That's certainly been a palpable shift to my mind, particularly over the pandemic period where that global consciousness has been awoken. And I think that that's resonated with a lot of the discussions that have been taking place here.
And is 1.5 still alive, do you think?
I think it's alive. I think it's a push. I think it's alive. I think we need to keep it alive. I appreciate the negotiations are still ongoing, and I'm not going to preclude anything they're going to come up with. But my ask is that they keep moving forward, they keep it alive, and that acceleration point can't be lost in whatever is the final agreement.
So that means that presumably areas like the Cambo oil field, which are off the Shetlands, should not go ahead?
Cambo's a hot topic. I've been asked about it over the course of the last couple of weeks. It's absolutely part of the decision-making process that has to go on. Fossil fuels are still here today. They're not part of our mix at Scottish Power. We're 100% green in terms of our generation, but I appreciate that there is a need for transition, and we're seeing that with a lot of the responses coming in from other countries as well. There is a transition. We need to be talking about it, but certainly from my organisation, we're not into fossil fuels, we're into green energy.
Yeah, but I mean, there are oil fields that are open at the moment that are pumping oil. We've got coal, I should say, coming in from Australia. Do we really need to start opening new oil fields?
To say that we're about renewable energy, that's somebody else's decision. There'll be other...
Yeah, but I'm interested in your opinion.
My opinion, if I'm speaking personally,
yeah, of course.
I think that we should be just going further and faster with the proven renewable technologies that we know of. That would be my preference.
Yeah. And how likely do you think it is for Scotland to reach its renewable targets?
Well, I think we touched on it on Monday. We talked about 97.4% of supply being coming from renewables. So Scotland is a bit of a success story in terms of its capability, but Scotland's part of the wider United Kingdom, where we're at 37%. So there is still a gap. We still need to do more. We absolutely need to make sure that the market mechanisms are there, that the regulation is responsive. So for me, the action right now is about getting those policies, market frameworks, routes to market, all of those things in place so that I can then take investments with confidence and deliver more green energy. Scotland's doing really well. We're going to get to 100, I have no doubt about that. But I also need to think about our customers more widely across the UK.
OK, good to talk to you again. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Here's a look at the climate change as it is actually happening right now. You can see the estimated temperature change compared to pre-industrial levels. This is now above 1.2 degrees. Under that is the estimated total carbon dioxide emissions. Most of this comes from burning fossil fuels and continues to rise. And then you can see on the right the real-time power mix. This data comes from the national grid and illustrates the sources of our electricity generation at this moment in time. The renewables number there consists of wind, solar and hydroelectric power. Don't forget, you can listen to all the latest climate news on Climate Cast, wherever you normally find your podcast. Much more from COP26 to come, but for now, Sally's standing by for us in London. Hello to you, Sally. Good morning.
Thank you, Kay. A very good morning to you. Yes. Our top story from here this morning is a murder investigation which is underway after 2 people were stabbed in Brentford in West London. 1 man is dead and a woman in her 80s is in a critical condition. Well, Sky's Emma Birchley is at the scene for us. Good morning to you, Emma. What more can you tell us on this?
Well, sadly, it's very common for us to be reporting on young people having been stabbed, but what's so unusual here is we're talking about a young man and an elderly woman. The emergency services were called here to Brentford in West London at around 10 to 8 last night, and very sadly, a young man said to be around 20 was pronounced dead at the scene, and the woman in her 80s was taken to hospital and, as we understand it, is critically ill at that hospital. Now, there's plenty of police activity here as the investigation goes on. Someone is still on the run. At the moment, we're told it's not being treated as a terrorist incident, but of course everything will be on the table. Now, to give you an idea of the location here, so Albany Parade, where this happened, is just off this side road here. It's a cul-de-sac with a block of flats there, and there's an alleyway that runs from that cul-de-sac onto the road where we are standing, and plenty of the roads around here have been cordoned off as the police carry out their investigations, but they're obviously keeping an open mind, and their priority will be to try to find the person responsible, and everyone hoping that the woman in her 80s is able to pull through from what she's been through.
OK, Emma, for now, thank you. Now her fans are calling it Freedom Day because Britney Spears has been released from her 13-year-long conservatorship. Her father, Jamie Spears, no longer has power over her life, and the pop star regains control over her own mental, personal and financial decisions for the first time since 2008. From Los Angeles, Martha Kellner has the story.
It is official, the conservatorship of Britney Spears has been terminated.
This is the moment they found out she is finally free. Britney Spears was 26 when her conservatorship began. She's now 39, and for the first time in almost 14 years, back in control of her near $60 million fortune and her life. Give us your reaction to what's happened.
Oh my gosh, you guys, she's free. We're happy. This is what we wanted.
What does freedom mean for her?
Our first act.
She can have her cell phone not monitored. She can see her children at will. She can leave her house when she wants to. Basic human rights, really.
I think this is a great start now that she's actually free. I think there's a lot more that still needs to be done to investigating as to how this corruption even went down.
Spears' conservatorship started in 2008 after a mental breakdown. It is an extreme legal arrangement granted for people who can no longer make their own decisions. In the years since, the pop star says it was abused. She claims she was drugged, forced to work, and even prevented from having more children. After the verdict, Spears posted this picture. "I can't freaking believe it," she wrote. "Best day ever." Many people here say the termination of this conservatorship is long overdue. They also say the fight for freedom for Britney Spears is still ongoing. Britney's own lawyer says she will now have to decide whether to investigate her father and his role in this controversy. For 13 years, Jamie Spears controlled his daughter's estate and personal affairs. Britney says he abused his position. Jamie says he only acted in her best interests. What have you accomplished today? What does it mean for Britney Spears?
It means that Britney's free.
And is this the end of the story, or does the fight continue to get justice for Britney? Because a lot of people believe this is long overdue, don't they?
I don't think it's the end of the story.
Jamie Spears, he might be in the line of target. You may go after Jamie Spears.
That depends on Britney.
After the dust has settled, she may return to the stage. But this time, it will be on her terms. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Los Angeles.
Other stories making the news this morning. A former top aide to Donald Trump has been charged with contempt of Congress after refusing to give evidence about the US Capitol riot. Steve Bannon was asked to testify on what he knew about plans for the protest that ended with the storming of Congress earlier this year. The 67-year-old has previously said his communications with the former president are protected by executive privilege. Glenda Fries, a businessman who flew to space last month with actor William Shatner, has been killed in a small plane crash. The software tycoon was one of 4 astronauts aboard Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin spaceship. He died along with a second man when his plane crashed in New Jersey. ABBA says they are over the moon after their first studio album in almost 40 years went straight to #1. The Swedish supergroup's record Voyage sold more than 200,000 copies in its first week, making it the fastest-selling album of the year so far.
Hello again, everybody. Yep, we are still at COP26, the summit here in Glasgow. Has a deal been done? Don't think so, Ashna?
No, I think we've got a few more hours to wait. But it's interesting to see that a bit of coal has been used today to power the whole of the United Kingdom. Yeah. But it's interesting. A lawyer said to me yesterday that you can't talk about climate change without talking about fossil fuels. It's a bit like talking about the virus, about the pandemic without talking about the virus. So it's very much on the cards that this is what we need to drive down to get to 1.5 degrees. If we don't limit the use of fossil fuels and emissions,
just dropped.
that simply won't happen. And of course, that is the warming of the Earth right now. We're sitting at about
1.23 degrees.
1.23 degrees, and we just don't want it to get above 1.5 degrees. At the moment, scientists are saying it's looking like that could get up to 2.4, and that would just mean the destruction of so many low-level lying countries, islands, places like things like extreme weather would continue. So it's vital that stays below 1.5.
If at all possible. I'm going to go over to the tree with you in just a second, and I don't know if we can have a look at it, and that's the tree. What is it all about? If you were with us yesterday, you'll know. If you weren't, we'll tell you in just a second. But before that, I want to bring in Dr. Virginia Marshall, inaugural Indigenous postdoctoral fellow with the Australian National University, a water expert member at the World Economic Forum as well. Hello to you, Doctor. That is a pretty impressive title that you have there. Basically, what we want to talk about this morning are Indigenous voices and whether they're being listened to in Australia.
Oh, well, I think we can talk about Australia and the world, but before I start, I'll just say in my own language, Wiradju in Wiradju Nyimba, Wiradju Marang, and also thank the people of Scotland. They've been absolutely warm and friendly to all of us, so thank you. I think the most important thing to remember is why we're here. Well, I'm here also for the university, but for the Indigenous Peoples organisation in Australia. And one of my missions was to also attend the local communities and Indigenous peoples meetings, which were very important over the last few days. And the expectation is to really, what we say in Australia and as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, unfinished business. And that seems to be the issue. Every year there's certain issues that are left undone, unsaid, and not completed. So this is the whole issue that I saw at the plenary for the People's Plenary yesterday. Was a lot of expectations that were sought to be reached. However, some people do feel that they're coming away empty-handed.
Australia has the highest emissions from coal in the world, though, doesn't it? I mean, what impact does that actually have on the area that you're from, for example?
Well, it has a huge impact, but you've got to remember that it's all of the countries of the world that make a huge difference to our climate crisis. And we know that the science is settled. That's quite clear. We've read the IPCC report throughout universities and governments, and we quite clearly know that it's not only Australia, but it's also the world. If everybody does their part and pays the debt, it will be a much better trajectory to work towards net zero emissions, and that's what we need to accomplish.
How seriously do you think the Australian government is taking climate change?
Well, I think that all governments need to take climate change seriously, and that includes Australia. But again, it really has to be all countries in, not one country out and all other countries in. So unless we address the extractive industries across the world and work together on this, Indigenous peoples said that yesterday at the plenary. We must work together, and we must require this network of Indigenous peoples across the world to keep the pressure up. And that's why it's really important to be here and you know, really coming from a pandemic, which you were talking about earlier, is an even harder restriction to get through and be here. So many of us have a great commitment to remind our countries of origin that they must play their part. That's immensely important.
And if we were talking to Ashna earlier about potentially temperatures rising to 2.4 degrees above 1880 levels, what would that mean for parts of Australia if that were to happen?
Well, it's very clear in talking with my other colleagues from Indigenous countries elsewhere. In Australia, it's quite clear too. We have flooding events, we have huge and long droughts, we have incredible heating events as well in Central Australia and elsewhere, where we haven't experienced those temperatures ever before. So it's very clear that people day to day, whether they're working in cities or living in remote or rural communities, they're very aware, and farmers are very aware as well, that it's not normal. This is not normal. And we are going to have a very hot summer, even though we've got intense rain at the moment. It's really clear, the science is clear, that we are experiencing different climatic conditions, and we can also read those signs in the environment. Those environmental indicators tell us that all the plants, the animals, the way that we read the land, it's really changed, and that's concerning because Indigenous peoples in remote communities really are going to fare the worst. And the second issue is that people who are vulnerable, who are living on social security and can't pay those energy costs to cool down or warm up, that's also a concern. It would be a concern across the world, including Great Britain.
OK. Dr. Marshall, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. I was promising you a look at what was happening as far as the tree is concerned. Ashna is standing by for us. Which way are you coming, Hedley? This way, there we go. Tell us about the tree.
This is basically a forest of pledges. That's what it's been called. Written by children across the UK. This is what they want to pledge to do to stop climate change in their own little way. There's quite a few young voices, I guess, that can be heard through this, and this is all about young voices in this generation that are directly affected by all the impacts of climate change.
Any to choose from?
Yes, this one's a direct message to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson.
You've broken it again. You did the same yesterday.
I'm so
we'll
sorry.
Put it back, we promise.
I will put it back. But this one says, Dear Boris Johnson, we should use solar-panelled wind turbines. That's a good idea. So we do not use as much electricity. Plus, wind turbines are very useful. And if we use solar panels for everyone, it will be great. No name on that one, though, but a nice picture of the wind turbine at the top, which is quite nice.
This one here, Hedley, just making the point, do not cut trees. And they've agreed that, haven't they?
They have. Deforestation deal, some $19 billion that's been pledged by over 40 countries that represent some 85% of the rainforests and forests across the globe. And that's significant because they soak up all that carbon dioxide. So if it's not carbon capture, we're looking at other means of doing so. It's always helpful, soaking up that carbon dioxide that's warming the atmosphere.
OK, we're looking at maybe a communique around about 8 o'clock.
Fingers crossed, another draft, Kay.
OK, looking forward to it. Thanks very much. Of course, when we hear about it, you'll know about it first here on Sky News, talking about this, talking about the planet. So many of us do want to move from one part of the world to the next, and certainly international travel has opened up again over the last few weeks. Just on Monday of this week, you could fly to the United States again for the very first time from the United Kingdom, first time in more than 600 days. So what does the future of aviation look like? Let's bring in Torsten Lange, Executive Vice President of Neste Corporation's Renewable Aviation. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. What does the future of aviation look like, sir? Good morning.
Good morning, Kay. Nice meeting you. Well, good question. How does the future look like? I think we need aviation. So future looks good. We just have to make an effort to making it more sustainable.
And how do we do that?
Well, there's various things. I mean, you heard a lot on the COP26 in the recent 2 weeks, but also before, the industry has been working a lot on making aviation more sustainable with technology, certainly with the engines getting more efficient, with having better flight routes. But me coming from the producers industry, certainly we had introduced new stuff that we can fly with. It's called sustainable aviation fuel, and this is one of the solutions for the aviation industry in the future.
What's it made of?
Well, it's made of waste and residues currently. So we're using, believe it or not, used cooking oil and animal fats. So every time now, okay, you're going to McDonald's, you just have to remember everything that you are producing there, or that the cooks are producing, that used cooking oil, we'll be using to making fuel out of that, which is quite magic, seems like, but it's carbon, so it can be reused, and that's important.
Yep, other fast food outlets are available, of course. She added, is it more expensive than using aviation fuel that we know of at the moment?
Well, it depends on what you're calling expensive. It does indeed cost more. We're talking currently about 3 to 5 times, but you just wonder what is expensive. Looking into the challenges we have in the future, so what is the price of carbon? That has to be taken into consideration. I mean, if you just compare now fossil with sustainable aviation fuel or SAF, it is more expensive. But I think there has to be put more into that equation, and then it's not that expensive anymore.
electric batteries for aeroplanes?
Well, electric batteries, everybody who had ever had, a little battery in hand knows how much weight that is and how fast that goes empty. And just imagine now you want to carry an A380 into air. You would have to basically pack that aircraft full with batteries, leaving no room for passengers. So electric flying, especially for long-haul and mid-haul flying, is not a solution. It will certainly help, for the short distances in future, and there's a lot of technology going on already on that side. But for long-haul and mid-haul, I don't see that kicking in anytime soon.
OK, good to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us this morning. Thanks a lot. Standing by at the board. Again, this, just so you know, is the boxing ring, as we call it. This is the studio, isn't it, for Climate TV?
Correct.
Channel 525?
Correct, absolutely. Streaming till the end of the day today.
Yeah, Sam Washington I've seen already this morning. She will be on air shortly, I'm sure. Just talk us through the board once more.
Yes, of course. So since the Industrial Revolution, of course, the Earth has been warming to a certain amount of degrees, and this is how much it's warmed by. So it's currently sitting at about 1.2 degrees, varying around that figure, and it's going up all the time. This is a live data dashboard, so it's being tracked every single moment. This middle figure, the total number of carbon dioxide emissions, currently sitting around 2 million tonnes of it. And how are we going to get that out? That's the main question. So carbon capture, things like trees that can soak it all up, but it's clearly not doing enough right now.
These figures are really important.
These figures are really important. This is the current amount of power that's being produced to power the whole of Great Britain. Wind at the moment, 36%. But yesterday we had 0% coal that was powering the UK, but look at it now, 2%. And that's what people want to avoid. Also nuclear and gas too.
Yeah, and we can testify to this figure this morning, can we not? Goodness me, the weather's been awful over the last couple of days.
Yes.
Still, people of Glasgow have made it a very warm welcome for us here. Not sure how much, thank you, not sure how much longer we are going to be here. This has been absolutely packed with delegates over the last couple of weeks or so. Many of them have brought their sleeping bags, we were hearing from Ashna, in an attempt to try to get a deal over the line today. Alok Sharma, who is the president of COP26, pulling out all the stops, Sally. Not sure if he will get that deal, but the signs are positive, is what we're going with at the moment. Positive. Stay tuned and find out more. Back to you, Sally, in London.
That is good to hear, Kay. Thank you. It could be another long day for you. Well, in a moment here, we'll take a look at this morning's papers with journalist Thomas Copeland and PA's political correspondent, Jerry Scott.
Did you know that reducing pollution outside of school can help stop toxic air getting trapped in our classrooms?
Saturday will start mainly dry, but some drizzly rain is possible in the south and east. Eastern England will stay dull and damp through the morning, but cloud elsewhere will thin and break to give some sunshine, best over Northern Ireland, Western Scotland and northwest England. It'll be mild once again. The afternoon will bring more of the same, but low cloud and patchy rain will extend across Northern Ireland. Looking at the UK's air pollution, levels are expected to remain low, measuring 2 or 3 on the Daily Air Quality Index.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
And with us this morning to review the papers are journalist and broadcaster Thomas Copeland and PA's political correspondent Jerry Scott. Hello again to you both. Thanks for joining us. Thomas, let's kick off with an article that you've picked out in The Times about how a COVID app threatens family holidays simply because they're just not ready yet to deal with children, with young passengers.
Yeah, that's right. Yet more problems with the NHS app. At the moment, it looks like the app doesn't allow children under 16 to record their vaccination status or prove that they've tested negative. So if you're going to countries, Italy, France, elsewhere on the continent, those kind of places all require proof of vaccination for children over the age of 12. So that's a major problem. The other thing that the parents will have to do in that case is pay for lateral flow tests every couple of days. They cost between 17 to 25 quid, according to this article. Imagine paying that every, 2 days when you're on a holiday for 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. The cost really starts to get up there. The other problem with the app, the other end of the spectrum, is that it doesn't appear to allow older folks who are getting their booster jabs to register that on the app either. Some parts of France are requiring booster jabs increasingly, and they'll only gain more places that are doing the same thing over the next number of months. The UK and particularly the NHS has had a real problem with these kind of big tech problems, especially in health. It seems really obvious to me that one of the key ways in which you try to incentivize people to get vaccinated is to ensure that they can enjoy the benefits that come with that fairly easily. That means having an app that allows you to register that you've been vaccinated, that you've tested negative, that you've got your booster jab. So, I was talking about the eye and the different scenarios that Whitehall have laid out into the next couple of years. All of them are hugely contingent upon vaccine uptake. So to encourage that, it's so obvious that the app needs to be functioning, and more than functioning, actually, it needs to be compatible with people who are trying to go abroad and elsewhere. That's a really strong and important way of trying to encourage people to take up the vaccine.
Certainly, even just the cost of testing has outpriced many families from going away, and now, of course, there's added complication with the app. Well, on money, Jerry, let's talk about the front page of the Scotsman about climate change and the deal hanging in the balance in Glasgow, and, of course, very much finances at the centre of what's being negotiated now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of this is how much money these countries are going to be able to put towards this aim. Yes, we've gone over by a day so far. These conferences, these summits very often do drag on a little bit over when they were supposed to end. But Alex Sharma has said that he's hopeful that the new text that is going to be released in about 10 minutes' time, I imagine, will get us over the line. The positives of people like China have indicated that they would want to sign a deal. They're frustrated over the lack of detail on how we might reach any aims that are included in that. But yes, you heard from your report just before we came on, people are there with their sleeping bags. I know our correspondents are and have been prepared to be there for the whole time. So hopefully we get it all wrapped up soon and we can crack on with making some progress.
Yeah, certainly it has reached the critical hours crunch point. Thomas, to you now on the front page of the FT weekend, the Netherlands reintroducing this partial lockdown. Of course, we're also looking at Austria planning curbs as well. On top of that, Bavaria in Germany has announced a state of emergency. Could this be the beginning of another wave of lockdowns in Europe, do you think?
Well, it looks likely to be. The Netherlands, you've mentioned Bavaria and Austria there as well. The Netherlands imposing curfews, ending sporting crowds, 1.5 social distancing, curfews at 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. in the evening as cases start to rise across Europe. The more interesting one, I think, is Austria. Austria, as of the last couple of days, have announced that come Monday, there will be a lockdown that applies specifically to the unvaccinated. They will only be able to leave their houses for essential purposes. Those are the conditions of the universal lockdown that applied earlier on in the pandemic. Austria has one of the lowest vaccine uptakes across Europe. Only about more than 33% of people haven't been vaccinated. The Chancellor's argument is basically one that you would hear probably quite often, which is that why should the freedoms of 2/3 of people be restricted because 1/3 of people don't hesitate? That there's still negotiations to go on with some of the very powerful state governors in Austria, and the way that the federal system works. Those are the people who actually have to facilitate and manage this lockdown. But it's a really controversial move. It's not one that I would expect to be replicated elsewhere. There's a huge amount of backlash already in Austria about it. My feeling actually is that there's a strong likelihood that it will never come to pass, and it might just be a fairly high stakes tactic in order to encourage people to take up the vaccine. Yeah. But there's clear concerns there about personal liberties and freedoms and the people who can't get vaccinated for medical or religious reasons, and can they have their freedoms imposed in that way? I don't think we'll see it replicated elsewhere, but we'll see what happens in Austria.
Yeah, certainly. Let's see. Meanwhile, Jerry, while the world is battling these two crises, COVID and, of course, climate change, the Tories once again making the front page of The Guardian amid these sleaze claims in recent weeks. And this time it's the Prime Minister's holiday to Spain last month that's on the front page again.
Yes, it's his trip to Marbella, and The Guardian seemed to have a correspondent on the ground who has dug through some court documents in Marbella and found that the villa he stayed in, which we already know is owned by the family of the Tory peer and Boris Johnson's friend Zach Goldsmith, that is then the businesses that they're involved in are then linked to this tax evasion kind of problem where they've been fined 24 million euros by the Spanish courts. And it really is just the latest after a week of sleaze allegations. The Prime Minister was out on the road yesterday saying that he doesn't think it's going to hit them at the polls in some upcoming by-elections. But of course, the opinion polls are really showing that Labour have taken a lead. Of course, we're a couple of years out still from a general election, so I imagine it'll all blow over by then. But yes, it is the kind of latest in these sleaze allegations, which I do think have harmed the government this week. Rishi Sunak seemed to suggest that he knew that and that the government must do better. So we'll see what comes next week and in the coming weeks when they propose a new standard system to try and rebuild the reputation.
Certainly the Mail's lead story today of that poll with Labour 6 points ahead certainly does show that those recent sleaze reports are hurting the Tory party. Just quickly before we let you go, Thomas, can we please talk about the puffin story?
Huge news, everyone. There's been a puffin found in Yorkshire for the first time in 135 years. It's been blown 50 miles. I think puffins are famously coastal birds. It's been blown 50 miles off course. There's a metaphor in there somewhere for climate change, perhaps, of the pandemic, but it's too early in the morning to make it. So if you're in Yorkshire, it's the first time that a puffin's been found since 1886. I don't know who recorded it at that stage, but it was found by a vet who's caring for it and will return it in due course to the sea where it should be. And
Jerry, very briefly, in the Express, wine prices could soar in the new year, please. What's going on?
I know, by up to 10%. And this is a combination of things like transport costs and material costs and work costs and all types of costs rising. But yes, if you thought that your bottle of red might get you through the winter, you're going to be paying a little bit more for it by the sounds of it. I mean, I'm heartbroken personally.
Very good excuse to detox, though. Thanks very much. We'll see you guys next hour. OK, that's the end of the paper review, but do stay with us because at the top of the hour, we'll be back with Kay Burley in Glasgow as the summit reaches those critical hours in negotiations. Already over last night's deadline, it's reached crunch point in Glasgow.